every year, the process is difficult, the budget process, even in the best of times. There's typically more requests than there is money, available. And the county administrator's office is charged each year with balancing that budget and bringing something forward, and we do so with great help from the departments on setting priorities. So there's a great deal of detail that we'll be discussing tonight, and we just want to ensure we're giving some of the history and background of why counties budget the way they do and the relationship with the state. And then we'll go into some specifics of requests for this year. And of course, we'll have time for discussion and questions and comments after the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Leanne Link, Assistant County Administrator. I'm pleased. This is the third year that we've done the budget study session. We had planned to do this in 2020, but COVID kind of made that difficult for us. But it really gives the board a bird's eye view of the budget. We focus on the general fund because that's where you have most of your discretion in the spending that we do. It's a very policy level discussion. It's really about big picture items and where we are. I will tell you that we have a budget deficit as we had last year and the year before and the year before that. This is based on the requests that the departments make and our preliminary pass at the discretionary revenues, which are mostly property tax and sales tax. So we really try to keep it very high level and conceptual. But there is room to ask questions. We have department heads here who are available if you have specific questions about their departments. And of course, the CAO's office is always here to answer questions as well. So what we'll cover today is just the process and the revenues that we have and other resources, the capital projects and building maintenance projects that are requested, the vehicle and other capital asset requests, and of course any new positions. And then we will review the areas of concern, the places that we see that really pose risk to the general fund down the road, or even right now. So the budget process starts really before the first of the calendar year. In December, we bring the budget calendar to the board, and the board adopts our budget policies. In January, we released the budget instructions to the departments, and this year those instructions included try as hard as you can to stay within your net county cost, or your cost minus your department-specific revenues for the budget year. Really difficult to do because we have growth in salaries always, and we gave departments the discretion to, consolidate between different budget units that they may have control over. But it's really hard, I think, hardest for the small departments where there's just one budget unit, and to manage, especially when you have a small number of staff and you really have no attrition rate. But I think the departments did a really good job of looking for other revenues, and also of looking at, do they have any place that they can trim? Obviously, with the deficit, we're going to have to trim some more or find some additional revenue. But the departments did a really good job at that this year. In March and April, the CAO's office begins the process of analyzing each and every budget unit. We look at all of the revenues, we look at all of the appropriations requests, we make sure that they are reasonable, especially the revenues. We don't want people grossing up their revenues to something that really isn't achievable, because we base the appropriations on that. And if you have high appropriations and your revenues don't materialize, then you have a true deficit. It's not just a budget deficit. And so we really want to make sure that everything in the budget is reasonable. We question everything they ask for. And the poor department heads and their fiscal staff must feel like, we're about to turn on a spotlight on them. But it really is an interactive process between the departments and the CAO's office. So then in April, of course, we do our budget study session. And then in June, we'll come back to you and present the board to you, or present the budget to you. It will be released to the public in early June. And we always release it as early as we can. It takes a lot of work to combine it into a more than 500-page budget book. There's a lot of detail in it, but we will get that out ahead of the budget hearings. On June 20th, the budget hearings will commence, and then the CAO's office will bring a tentative recommended budget back to you for approval, and that allows us to continue operating after July 1. This year, which is a little bit different from last year, we're not going to ask for budget adoption until after the fiscal year 22-23 books are closed, because we want to make sure that any fund balance carryover from the prior fiscal year really has materialized, because we don't want to have to make adjustments as soon as the budget is adopted. And then finally, once we have adopted, or the board has adopted the budget, the auditor controller must submit a balanced budget to the state controller's office by December 1st by law. So in December of 2020, the board adopted policy number 504, the budget and fiscal management policy, which is really important because this sets some thresholds for us. The board has a policy to increase our general reserve by $500,000. Just a few years ago, that was $1.1 million for a general fund budget that's about $80 million. Not nearly enough. The Government Finance Officers Association recommends that you have 16.67%, or about 60 days working capital. Our targets are 5% in the general reserve and 5% in the budget stabilization reserve. And the difference between the two, and the reason that we bifurcate those, is that the general reserve can only be appropriated at budget adoption or in a declared disaster. So it's really restricted in its use. On the other hand, a budget stabilization, and I know you've heard me many times before say that roller coaster budgeting is not good for anybody. It's not good for you. It's not good for your constituents. It's not good for the departments providing services. So budget stabilization reserve allows us to smooth. If we saw a dramatic decline in the economy and in our revenues, which we saw back in 2008 and 2009, it gives us a chance to smooth into any cuts. So we don't have to do drastic things until we really know the lay of the land. And that's really its purpose. And then the policy also provides for an increasing appropriation for contingency. So we started out with $800,000. Last year, when the board adopted the budget, it was a little over $1.4 million, and that's because we took a position out for budget adoption, and so we just increased because we have to have a balanced budget, we just increased the contingency appropriation. But this year, so originally we started with 1.2 last year. This year it goes to 1.4, and eventually we'd like to get it up to about the $2.5 million mark. All of these three things combine to give us cash flow, because the way that the funds flow into the county is we don't get the first payment of property taxes. They don't hit our books, our cash, until about January. And so we're carrying all of the costs for general fund departments, net of their revenues that do come in, like Prop 172 and sales tax. Those come in incrementally, but the vast majority is the property tax. And so we need to be able to carry that cash for a period of time. So that's what our reserves and our contingency really do for us as well. We do not ever want to be in negative cash or overdrawn in the general fund. And then finally, our policies require that we deposit a minimum of $1 million annually into our pension pre-funding account with Public Agency Retirement Services, or PARS, and that we put $100,000 into our other post-employment benefits, or OPEB, account with PARS also. And so that $1.1 million allocation is included in the proposed budget, as it has been for the last couple of years. So we also require that funds don't get, there are funds that don't get planned general fund support, like behavioral health, like social services beyond the $432,000 maintenance of effort. We want those, or the roads funds. We want those funds to have fund balance so that they also can withstand a downturn, or they can carry their cash flow as well if their funds don't materialize quickly. And in the past, especially with the number of state and federal programs, we've had delays in the state government paying us. So we really do need to have sufficient fund balance carried forward. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to do a little bit of kind of background work, because I think these are really important concepts to understand. A county is not a city, nor is it a special district. A county has a very unique place in the state or within the United States. We are not an independent state on our own. We are a subdivision of the state, as the state reminds us over and over again. And our main role is as agents of the state. This is where most of our revenues come from. This is where most of our expenditures occur. We provide state-funded and federal-funded, locally administered services. And these services are really important. There are a lot of critical safety net services. There are roads. There are all kinds of really important services. And that's our primary focus. It's not necessarily palatable to everyone, but that's the way things have evolved over time. The second most expensive thing for us, and our second largest service, is to provide services county-wide. We are the only jail. We are the only recorder of deeds. We are the only entity that can legally conduct elections. Those are things that a city can't do on its own, or a special district can't do on its own. We are required by the state to handle those, and we handle it regardless of jurisdiction. We don't say, oh no, you live in a city, so therefore you don't get an election. Everybody gets the same service from us regardless of where they live. And then finally, we're the municipal service provider in the unincorporated areas. And for us, that also includes being the law enforcement for the city of Live Oak, and also for a portion of the city of Yuba City through the Master Tax Exchange Agreement and the annexation of certain parts into the city limits. But these are services like roads. They're the same services that are provided in the city, but they're provided on a much larger scale. Geographically, the area of the county is far larger than the areas of the incorporated cities, at least within Sutter County. So the state and county finances are inextricably tied together. They don't function without us in providing services. We don't function without them, without funneling the money to us. And so it's really important that we always keep that in mind, that we have a kind of a symbiotic relationship. But one of the things that is the most I want to say distressing, maybe just critical, it is what it is that our financial autonomy has eroded tremendously in the last 40 years. The ability of the Board of Supervisors to say, these are our local priorities, and we want to do this, has been eroded to, you have very little control over the actual spending within the budget that you have responsibility for. So, all of this matters because with that scarce money, you have to do so much and you have to provide so many services across the county that it's really important to understand this and to be able to communicate it to your own constituents that a county is really different in what it actually does. So just a little, and I'll try to get through this pretty briefly, but a walk down memory lane. In 1910, the Separation of Sources Act, which was a proposition that was voted on by the voters of California, who, by the way, were only men because women couldn't vote until 1920, separated the revenues. And it said the state will take the fees and taxes from railroads, telegraph, and telephone, and counties will get property tax. So in that time, the counties would determine what services would be provided, and the schools would say, this is how much we need, and then the taxes would be aligned with the services that were intended to be provided. And so if a county wanted to provide more services, people were taxed at a higher rate. If counties provided a smaller band of services, people got taxed at a lower rate. And that really does matter. So in 1978, Prop 13 came along, and it was a constitutional amendment imposed by the voters of the state of California that limited ad valorem, or taxes based on value, to 1% of the value of the property, and it could increase no more, the value of the property could increase no more than 2% per year until the property was sold or majorly renovated. So this was devastating to counties. It immediately cut property taxes by 50%, and it was retroactive in that the base tax rate was set in the prior year, and counties were already operating on a budget where they thought that they were going to get far higher revenues. And counties said, we're not going to be able to function. And so the state had a surplus at the time, and the state came in and they said, oh, we'll help you. We'll help you out. And so in 1979, they passed Assembly Bill 8, AB 8. You probably hear our AB 8 factor. So AB 8 came in and it restored some services for health services, which for us, one of our AB 8 programs was Gel Medical, among other public health programs. But the more crucial thing that it did is it said, at this point in time, this is your share of the statewide property tax total, and that's the percentage that you're going to get forever and ever and ever. And so our AB 8 factor is about 16, it runs between about 16 and 17%, depending on the tax rate area. In California, we have an AB 8 factor in Alpine County, no incorporated cities, very few schools, very few children. And so they get about 67% of their property taxes. Orange County, big cities, lots of kids, lots of schools, they get about 6% of their property taxes, their AB 8 factor. And it's spread between all of those. And so you see some will be down in the 12, 13% range. You'll see some counties that may be as high as 23 or 24%, all based on how efficient their government was operating at the time. So you're forever going to be in that smaller amount if you did the right thing back in, pre-Prop 13. So, and tried to control your costs. So in 1991, the California state was in a deficit again. And you're going to hear a pattern here, and very deliberately. So the state said, oh, we're not going to pay for AB 8 programs anymore. And so counties said, okay, then we won't do it. And the state said, well, no, don't do that. We'll get you this dedicated funding source. And it was also a way to try to fix some of the funding problems with behavioral health. But then the state, of course, came along and said, oh, and wait, we want to pass more cost for welfare programs, including aid to families with dependent children, AFDC, and other costs along to you, but we're going to give you the money to pay for it. So this was actually okay for counties because you still had autonomy to design program at the local level within, clear parameters, but there was a lot more flexibility to it. And the state looked at that and went, oh, wow, this is a really great funding source for counties. Well, they're never going to let that go for very long. So in 1992, the state is in an even worse deficit, and they said, oh, well, we're going to shift some money. And they knew that they had, it used to be called revenue limit. It's now called local control funding formula in the schools that tries to even out. It's based on a court case, Serrano versus Priest. And it tries to even out the funding that's made to schools so that you don't have Beverly Hills School that has this level of buildings and teachers and everything. And then a lower income, maybe in Oakland, that can't afford that much. So Serrano versus Priest tried to even that out. And then Prop 98 came along and it said there will be a guarantee in the state general fund for an amount of funding that goes to schools. So the state knew that they were going to have a problem meeting their Prop 98 guarantee in 1992. So they said, well, let's do this. We'll take this money from local property taxes and we'll move it over through the Education Revenue Augmentation Fund, which always sounds really good. And we're going to give it to the schools. The schools were held harmless because they still had their revenue limit. They knew how much they were going to get. But the state reduced its general fund obligation directly out of the pockets of county government. Cities and special districts also took an ERAF hit, but it's nowhere like what the county did. I think that the ERAF hit for last year for the city of Yuba City was about $1 million. Our special district, like the CSAs, anywhere between $30,000 and maybe $80,000. Sutter County's was $15 million. When we have a $30 million a property tax base, that means that they're taking a third of our money to backfill the state general fund. So when I get asked by, every once in a while, legislators will say, hey, Leanne, what could we do? It's always undo ERAF, because it was so detrimental to counties. And counties said, fine, we won't be able to do public safety service, basic public safety. And so the state negotiated, and they gave a partial backfill for public safety programs out of the transportation fund in 92. And then 93, they put Proposition 172 on the ballot. And it was intended to backfill a portion of that loss. But $15 million in ERAF shift. Last year we had $12 million in Prop 172. So you see, it doesn't really make up the whole difference. And it was for very specific services, sheriff, corrections, so our juvenile hall is funded out of that as well, district attorney, fire and emergency services, and oddly enough, ocean lifeguards. We don't have very many of those here. So in 1996, Prop 218 was passed, and this had two major changes to it. One was it changed the voting requirements for special taxes to a 2/3 majority, and then it also provided new procedures for benefit assessments, certain fees, and water and sewer rates. So you hear about a Prop 218 study. That's what we base rates on. Well, County Service Area F at that point had already been formed, and it was doing a benefit assessment. So CSAF gets a share of property tax, and at the same time, they were getting a benefit assessment that everybody in CSAF was paying. This changed it. It was going to make it so complicated and wasn't going to generate the amount of money that was needed. And so that's when the special fire tax in CSAF actually came to be, and it was a replacement of that benefit assessment. So fast forward to 2004, the state's in a deficit again, and the vehicle license fees had been artificially reduced because the state had been in a surplus, and so they went from 2% ad valorem down to about 2/3%. And the governor at the time, Gray Davis, said, hey, this had a trigger, and so he automatically triggered and brought the vehicle license fees back up. So your vehicle license fee went from about $100 to about $300. Well, that forced the recall of Governor Davis and got us the governor. So at that time, the governor said, Governor Schwarzenegger said, we have to refinance this deficit that we have. And so they wanted to issue a bond, and they didn't have the funds to do it. So what they did was a triple flip, and it's a very complicated system, but basically they swapped out property taxes and sales tax and vehicle license fees and gave us money in lieu in order to finance their bond. It went on for a period of 10 years, and counties, were pretty much made whole. There was a little bit of a lag at the end, but eventually we were made whole from that. But the more seminal thing that happened was Prop 1A. And Prop 1A amended the state constitution and said, you shall never take money from counties again. And we thought that it was protective language at the time. So no more ERAF shift. That can't happen legally. But the state can find other ways to transfer things, like 2011 realignment. If it worked in 1991, it must work 20 years later. So the state was in trouble. They had a receivership on the jail or on the prisons, and so they said we have to reduce the prison population. So we're going to give responsibility for these certain prisoners that are, not the worst ones. We're going to give that to the counties, and of course we'll give you the money to fund that. And they also made some changes to health realignment at the time, and they changed the mechanism for behavioral health realignment. We used to pay into the County Medical Services Program for our medically indigent. The state said, under the Affordable Care Act, you guys don't have responsibility for those anymore, which is wrong. We still have responsibility for the medically indigent. But they said, we're going to take that money that was going to CMSP, and we're going to give that as CalWORK's payment increases. And so then you guys don't need it anymore, and that was the switch that was made then. But the biggest deal was now we have long-term felons in our county jails with their medical issues. We have post-release community supervision in lieu of state parole. So we're seeing a higher acuity of criminals that we're having to supervise. And then, you know, what came along with that is we're going to give you this money, but we're going to put it in the hands of a community corrections partnership, which includes the chief probation officer, it includes the sheriff, it includes the district attorney, it includes one of the judges. And so they shifted the ability for a board to allocate that money as they saw fit on a policy level to a smaller group of people. It's okay because we have good elected officials, and so it's worked well for us, but it can cause conflict in counties. So why does it matter? So right now the state is projecting a $25 billion deficit. Our lobbyists have looked at the cash receipts coming in, and they say it's more like $40 billion. Every time the state is in a deficit, they look to the counties. We're not seeing where the state is wanting to make any cuts internally in its own programs. So we will see something, and we're already starting to see it. Counties have little ability to raise local revenue. There's a ballot initiative that's been qualified for November of 2024. It would require a 2/3 vote to raise general taxes. So it would be the same threshold as we currently have for special taxes. And then the state is passing on already increased responsibilities without sufficient funding and really without regard to what the impact is locally. And this is where it's really important, I think, for us to be good advocates at a statewide level. This is the state's pattern, and this is going to continue to happen. So back to this year, or next year, this is our and I actually have a typo in there that I didn't catch earlier. These are our 2023-24 estimates. And we have, within the general fund, we have department-specific revenues. And I'll give you an example. The Ag Department operates, and it has a certain amount of appropriations they get, but they also have their own dedicated money. So the difference between their dedicated revenues and their total cost of operations is what we term net county cost. So when we add up all of their department-specific revenues, those are about $20.5 million. This is only in the general fund. This does not include the public safety fund, the trial court fund, or the health fund. And then when we look at our general revenues, those revenues that you really have discretion over, that's about $50.5 million. So last year when you adopted the budget, we had a carryover from the previous year. This year we're predicting a similar carryover, a savings between what revenue actually was projected at and what it came in at, which is a little bit higher, and then what the actual appropriations were, or the adopted appropriations versus the actual projected expenditures. So we think we're going to carry about $10.9 million over into the year. So that gives the general fund about $82 million to operate on. So this is our property tax revenue over the last 8 years. And I think the most important thing to notice here, there are a couple of things. One is it's relatively flat, which we know that because we've seen these projections through Measure A and over again. What we're not seeing is huge development in the unincorporated areas, which would drive up the tax base and provide more funding for those general services that we're providing throughout the county. And then the other thing is we see that growth slowing a little bit. So this year, it's going up a little, and then next year it will go up a little bit too, but that growth is starting to slow. And so that's one of the things that we look out for. So then our sales tax revenue is actually projected for us by Hinterleiter DeLamas. They are the premier sales tax consulting agency in the state. And what we're seeing here is our average growth is about 5% per year. we're looking at probably negative growth next year. And there are a few things that drive that. So if you look on this, you see in 2021, in COVID, our sales tax actually went down a couple $100,000. But then it pops back up the following year. What that is two major drivers. One is that people started shopping online, so the revenue from that goes into the pool. And there was a decision, it's called the Wayfair decision, that required that if you buy something out of state, you still must pay California state sales tax on it. So that tax is collected, and it's allocated down through the pool for us. In 2022-23, what we're seeing is a little bit of a softening in the economy. But more than that, we've got the decision that a major online retailer, which may be the largest retailer in the world and has big smiles on their trucks, but we're not allowed to say what their name is, they shifted the way that they allocate the sales tax. And so the point of sale is no longer your computer, or what my husband would say, it's no longer your computer. That's not the point of sale. The point of sale is the distribution center in California where that product originates from. And so what that's done is that shifted a lot of those funds from smaller rural counties who use a lot of online sales to large counties that are on large arteries. And so it really has benefited counties like Sacramento, San Joaquin, Riverside. Any of those are really benefiting at the expense of Tehama or Alpine or Sutter. So, this is why Sutter Point is so crucial for us, because the homes down there, great, but if we can get major businesses, major distribution centers, and it's so perfectly poised for that, it really can change the services that we're able to provide countywide. So these are the people, or the programs that we provide services through. And these programs are provided regardless of which jurisdiction you live in. We don't say, oh, no, that one's not for you because you're a city resident. These are provided across the board, and it's everything. It's the agriculture commissioner, who also is the weights and measures person. So when you go out and you buy a pound of fruit, you should have confidence. Even if it's in a grocery store in Yuba City, you should have confidence that you're getting a pound of fruit. That really matters to people because that's dollars and cents in your pocket. These are the district attorney's office. We don't say, oh, the crime was committed in Yuba City, and so therefore we're not going to prosecute it. We prosecute crimes no matter where they're committed within Sutter County. And, as an aside to that, within the jail, we've looked at the statistics, at the booking statistics and the people who actually are kept in the jail. And the vast majority is Yuba City Police Department, and then there are some that are the Highway Patrol. That's really hard to tease out to know if it was in the county or the city. That's based on where the crime is committed. And so the city is a much larger user of our jail than the unincorporated area or the city of Live Oak. We process passports. All you have to do is go over to Donna's office and you'll see the lines out there every day. We provide property records. When you buy a piece of property and you go to sell it later, you want to make sure that that's the property that you bought. These property records are not done on a city-by-city basis. It's only done by our recorder's office, and it's really important to have those documents be protected. And so these are all those services that people don't know that we provide, but yet they're absolutely crucial regardless of where you live. We also provide the municipal services, as I mentioned earlier, in the unincorporated areas. We are the building inspector. We are the roads inspector. We are law enforcement. We provide the planning commission so that planning is done thoughtfully. We provide water resources, and then internally we have the services that support the system as a whole. So even the residents of the city are the beneficiaries. Our treasurer, for example, is not only the treasury for the county, they're the treasury for the schools. Our tax assessor assesses the value of properties, and the treasurer tax collector collects those. He doesn't just collect for the county of Sutter, he collects for the cities, he collects for the schools. And so it's really important that even these services are really acknowledged as being of value regardless of where you live. So this is the deficit, and we're at about $3.2 million right now. This is not unusual. Remember, this is a part of the normal process, and we do bring you in June a balanced budget. We will never bring you a budget that's not balanced. But right now we're trying to close a $3.1 million gap. And it's getting more and more difficult to close that because the departments are getting leaner and leaner and leaner to where it's really difficult to continue operations to the level that people expect. So you had asked at the March 28th meeting to see what the cost of the management raises are. And when we first calculated, we do at a higher level where we say this is what the overall cost is, but we don't apply those department-specific revenues. Through the budget process, we're actually able to identify those. So really the net general fund cost of those raises is about $784,000. And that's for the budget year. For this year, it's about $90,000, and that's because it's a little bit smaller than what was given to you because it represents fewer pay periods. But the total cost is about $874,000. So these are the general funded costs, and we divide up our services into specific operating special revenue funds. So the public safety fund, which we talked about in the context of 172, which includes not only the sheriff and district attorney and jail, it also includes our fire administration, it includes our Office of Emergency Services, it includes our share of the juvenile hall costs. It has a lot of things in there, but they're all public safety. So the net county cost for there went up by about 19.7%. It's $27 million is the net county cost. The general fund went up by about 8.5%, and there are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, there are a lot of departments in the general fund, and so those smaller departments, it's harder for them to absorb the cost increases. But also, we've got some additional expenses in there that are related to the workday conversion that won't be repeated in future years. So it's a little distorted. Our health fund actually went down by about 7%, and the reason for that is additional revenue. They were able to identify additional revenue to support their programs, but the additional revenue was offset by an increase in the cost of homeless services, and jail medical went up pretty substantially this year. Our trial court...
Through the chair, I'm sorry. I just have one quick question for you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what was the annual cost of the maintenance for the workday? Again, once we install it?
Oh, Ken, is Ken here?
Is it around $600,000 to $700,000?
I think that's the gross cost, but we were already paying for one solution.
Right, okay.
So it wasn't as much. I think we were already paying $150,000-ish for one solution. But remember that cost is borne, at least 50% is borne by state and federal programs. It's allocated across the entire county.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, for sure.
You guys don't mind if we hold up to ask questions after the presentation?
Yeah, so I knew what
it's okay. I can go. I can answer. So trial courts went down a little bit, and I really have to hand it to our probation department because they got very aggressive and shifted. They're holding some probation officer positions vacant, as well as they got the community corrections partnership to pay for funding for some of those. And so while that's really great, we have to be very cautious about using CCP funding because there's a lot of it right now, but that will diminish over time. And so we want to make sure that we can preserve as many positions as possible. There are some other things too that CCP really helped out the general fund costs this year by picking up some costs that otherwise would have been general fund obligation. Our contingency is down. Like I mentioned, we had increased it during budget adoption just because we had eliminated a position. And then our pension and OPEB pre-funding, our increase in our reserves, and the maintenance of effort contribution to social services remain the same. Those are mostly set by policy, and then the social services is just an MOE. So these are the largest increases, and this is normal. The sheriff, we have negotiated salaries and benefits, negotiated wage increases, and so we see a pretty hefty jump in the sheriff's budget in the county jail and communications, which is dispatch. The county clerk's office is a little bit high, but that's because the cost of the remediation in the clerk's office building is included in there. So I think that one's artificially high. The building maintenance, I think, also had some one-time costs. Bi-County Juvenile Hall continues to climb. It's one of those things, and it went up by about $300,000 this year. The county administrator and human resources are kind of artificially grossed up because those include the limited term positions that the board approved last year, and those will be charged back to departments through the cost allocation plan. So, but we have those limited terms; those will go away next year. And then the district attorney, they had some salary and benefit increases, and of course, jail medical, as I mentioned, went up. Those are just the top 10. Most departments really tried to stay at that no increase in net county cost. So right now, I think you're probably tired of listening to me, so I'm going to ask our principal analyst, Laura Granados, to come up and walk you through the capital projects, the capital asset purchases, the IT purchases, the vehicles, and the personnel, and then I'll come back to wrap it up in just a few minutes.
Good evening, Chair and Board. Like Leanne said, I'm going to review all the projects and people and vehicles for you. So before you have the general fund impacted capital projects and building projects. To note, all of these have been included in the fiscal year 23-24 budget. Some of them have been requested for the past few years, and due to supplies or staffing, they haven't been completed. Just to note, there are a few. The sheriff at the jail, they have a BSCC audit finding for the ligature points remodel, the single cell lock motor replacement. So those are definitely critical projects that need to be looked at this year, as well as the 463 data center, the cooling system replacement, and the UPS replacement. And of course, our clerk recorder has a 100-year-old building that is definitely in need of attention. So yes, these are all really important projects that the departments have requested that will probably impact the general fund should they be approved. And before you is the list of non-general fund projects. And again, the behavioral health had a grand jury audit finding for the ligature remodel. And so that is definitely a critical project. Child Welfare Services has some move, and they're paying for it with their federal, state, and realignment revenues. And I'm not going to run through all of these. Leanne had talked to you about the Community Corrections Partnership picking up on a couple of projects. The sheriff had a TV communications project that was approved a couple years ago, and they found that the conduit wasn't sufficient size to have the wires run through it, so they went back to the CCP and requested assistance with the conduit project. And so that's what both of those are, and the CCP did agree to help out with that. This is a list of the capital asset purchase requests that are not vehicles. Most of these are general fund impact, except for the one road fund. With regard to the sheriff, the communications, the consulates, those are for the encryption. Same with the 14 Motorola radios. There's been the DOJ put out a requirement for a certain encryption level, and number one, for officer safety, but also to protect the information that's being transmitted. And both of those are to upgrade those systems to meet with that requirement from DOJ. And these are our general fund impact vehicle requests. I'm not going to go ahead and list it out for you unless you'd like me to. I can talk about them if you'd like. To note, the one that I really am a little bit passionate for, so it's a personal thing, is the Farm Advisor vehicle. It is a 22-year-old vehicle with really high maintenance costs. So it is, they are requesting it to be funded by general fund, 63%, and then the other 37% would come from Yuba County. But all of these vehicles are, I'm sure, important. What happens is the General Services Department, they rate all of our vehicles in the county based on the number of miles, the age of the vehicle, and the maintenance costs. And so the only vehicle requests before you today are the ones that are at a level 15 or higher, maximum is 20. So these are all used vehicles, is probably the nicest way to put that. And these are the non-general fund impact vehicle requests. To note, Development Services has about 6 vehicles here that do need to be replaced because they are older than 2010. They are diesel vehicles. And I don't know really the requirement for that. Maybe Neil knows the exact, but anyway, it's a state. Neil, do you know? Oh, thank you. I'm glad you know. So anyway, so they do need to be pulled off the road and replaced. And then the others are being replaced with realignment funds and road funds. This is the list of information technology requests that are general funded. Again, I can read through them. Here's the workday that you were asking about. And these are post-implementation support primarily, and these are all already included in the general fund committed fund balance. And then the sheriff needs an upgrade for his patrol vehicles, and that's a programming upgrade for their computers, as well as the county data backup and licensing for a system administrator position. And these are the information technology requests that are not generally funded, and it's primarily HHS behavioral health. They need PCs, monitors, printers, scanners, those types of things. The departments did a great job this year by reducing the number of position requests that are generally funded. This one assessment technician position is critical to the department. Assessor skills are very difficult to recruit for. And this particular position is needed for succession planning. And then the 2 sheriff positions, those are contingent upon the Live Oak contract being negotiated, or renegotiated, I should say. And then this is the list, part 1 and part 2. There's 2 pages here of non-general fund impact requests. To note, to Leanne's point, the district attorney added an investigative aide paid for by CCP, and the sheriff at the jail added a correctional officer, again paid for with CCP funds. And the emergency services department is adding a staff analyst limited term with their fire safe grant to do some special projects for them that their staff doesn't have time to do. And back to you.
Thank you, Laura. So I just wanted to give you a brief update. I know that the question has come up about our ARPA funds. So as you recall, the county was allocated $18.8 million. We were able to do the state or the Treasury, U.S. Treasury's calculation, and calculated our revenue loss during the period that they gave us as $28 million, almost $29 million. And that means that the entire allocation could be used as revenue replacement, which gives you guys a lot more discretion in how those funds are spent. The allowable use is governmental expenditures, excluding lump sum payments to pensions, to reserves, and to subsidize a tax decrease. The board's commitments to date, all of which have been approved in an open session by the board, is $16.5 million. Those have been used for essential worker pay in both the sheriff's office and in fire. The subsidies, which are substantial for CSAF, economic resilience grants that were provided in the community for small businesses, COVID-19 in-home testing that was distributed in the community, and also we used some of those within the county to ensure that we had staff who were safe to be providing services. Cybersecurity software and hardware, if you haven't become exposed to secret double octopus yet, it is coming. And it's a multi-factor authentication to keep our data safe, because we know that governments are continually under attacks. And in fact, we've been under attack. And as you recall, Yuba County had a significant attack, and it was very costly for them. And then homeless utility hookups. We had some trailers that we got during CARES Act, and we were able to convert those to homeless housing, but we needed utility hookups for those in order to do it. There is $2.3 million remaining, and the deadline to encumber those funds is December 31st, 2024. So the CAO's office will come back to you later on in the year with some recommendations on using that. My suggestion would be that we offset things with that would normally be a county general fund cost, and because that's the most fluid use of the money for us. So there are a number of areas of concern that are either existing right now or they are imminent, and so I wanted to go through those, and I'll try to go through those relatively quickly and then wrap everything up with some suggestions on how to balance the budget. So one of the most acute problems that we're facing right now is not being able to fill positions. We have multiple failed recruitments, or the candidates are significantly underqualified. We just had a successful recruitment for the district attorney's office. She was looking for felony prosecutors. We had lots and lots and lots of low-level prosecutors and zero candidates that we could hire for felony prosecution. We kind of have to do felony prosecution. So this is, and this is becoming a trend throughout every department. And when this happens, we are losing key staff. We had, we have several key staff who are leaving us for jurisdictions that pay more money, and they offer better work-life balance because people aren't having to do 2 jobs or a job and a half. And so this is really quite unique to Sutter County because we're so skinny to begin with. Also, this generates a loss of money from revenue generating positions. We're not able to generate those revenues. And many times those revenues come with an administrative overhead cost that we're also not capturing. And then employee burnout. Our employees are tired and they're working so hard and they're so dedicated, but they see no end in sight to that. So then County Service Area F, and I feel like I'm a broken record on this one. This one is what keeps me awake at night because there's such a need out there. We know that the fire services are crucial in this area, but increasingly CSAF is relying on the county to fund services that really should be being paid by the CSA itself. And over the last 3 years, this board has approved $3.6 million in funding to support them, or about $100,000 a month to support CSAF beyond the monies that are generated within that CSA. This conflicts with the original CSA formation back in the 90s. The CSA was never intended to be supported by funds other than those generated in the CSA. And that's in the establishing documents. The use of Prop 172 funds, which has been suggested, we can't recommend in our office, because all that will do is leave a bigger general fund hole. So it's basically a general fund subsidy. And could we use them? Absolutely. And if we did, what I would suggest is maybe we provide those funds in proportion to CSAF's ERAF shift. And in that case, it would only be about probably between $65,000 and $80,000 a year. It's not going to fix the problem. So there is a citizen initiative out there, and some people have been working very hard on this, and we are so appreciative of that. But without dedicated funding, I think your board is going to face some really difficult decisions about whether or not you continue to subsidize that when you don't subsidize CSAD and CSAC and CSAD. And so, you know, or does the CSA have to just reduce its services to live within the revenues generated, which would include grant funds? I know that Chief Shalowitz is applying for another round of SAFER grant funds. There's no match to that. So it really would shore up some of their funds, but funding grant cycle to grant cycle to grant cycle and not solving the long-term problem really is not good public policy. The increases in the public safety fund costs, and this is not to say this is the sheriff or this is the DA. It's across the board. These costs are increasing. One of our deputies made a comment when we were looking at Measure A, and he said it's a free agent market, and he's right. There are so few people that want to go into law enforcement, or they want to go into the legal side, and so you have to pay a higher wage in order to get good quality people. It's really crucial, but this is escalating our cost way above what we're seeing in any other department. And so, you know, fortunately, even at the higher salaries, it's still difficult to recruit. It's much better than it was, but it's still difficult. And so we are generating some significant salary savings in the sheriff's budget. And then what's not included in the budget is there's a 3% increase for DSA that's included in there. That's the floor. If the market comes in that it's higher, there's a 10% threshold. And so wherever that falls, if it's 5%, then we're going to have to find additional revenue. But we can't predict that. We don't know what it's going to come in at, and we'll have to have that in place by June. So that's when we'll know what the real hole is there. And then homelessness. You know, we continue to provide the vast majority of homeless direct services. And these are the services that get people out of homelessness and into treatment services, into housing. And this is us. This is what we provide kind of as a last resort. And so the cost is continuing to escalate. It was about $400,000 in 2021. We started a new budget unit just to capture these costs. And so it was $767,000, almost $768,000 in 21-22. Last year, fortunately, we got some additional grant funding. So it dropped it down to about $500,000. This is not small change. This year, we're projecting about $1.13 million in net county costs. And because of the structure of our health fund, we'll use some realignment funds where we can, but there's not enough realignment funds to pay for it. So it becomes a general fund cost. And then our behavioral health concerns. This is part of that state passing things on to us without providing funding. So the governor's looking at care courts. Well, you know, we'll fund a portion of it, but they're not going to fund the increased public guardian services, the increased commitments, the increased public defender services, because these people will have due process rights. And they've said that they're going to fund part of the court costs, but there are all kinds of other ancillary costs. So the number of people that we can afford to provide these services is going to stay the same. So if you're escalating here, you're cutting there. And so it's really important that we understand what exactly is happening. Then the governor is proposing, it's actually the Eggman bill, proposes to, is it the Eggman? There's not here. Eggman proposes to redirect the MHSA money, is that right? Yeah. Okay, and then at the statewide level, so when they redirect that money, it means that it's going to not come here and it's not going to provide the services that we're already providing. And then payment reform, which will ultimately be a little bit better for us, is going to require a float. We're going to have 3 months of additional revenue. And the state is willing to subsidize that, but we have to keep that 3 months of revenue. So if we don't get paid by the 4th month or the 5th month or the 6th month, guess who's carrying that float? And then we're having a huge increase. And I asked Sarah to come along on this one because I think it's so profound, the changes that are happening. Huge increases in commitments to locked facilities, and the state, under another lawsuit, can't have people on waiting lists for state facilities for people who are incompetent to stand trial. So these people are sitting and waiting in our jails. The state has put a cap, and they said, and if you send anybody above the cap, we're going to charge you $160,000 for each person. Well, so these people are languishing in our jails, and jails are not treatment facilities. These people aren't going to get better in our jails. And so this is one more way that the state has passed its requirement onto the counties. And then finally, there's an increasing difficulty in the complexity. That the JPA that formed the Bi-County Behavioral Health was done back in the 1960s. It was done before Prop 13, before ERAF, before realignment. And now it's getting even more complex. And to tease out what services are we supposed to be providing across the river and what services are we not. And that's very hard to articulate, very hard for people to understand. And so just the administrative burden of providing services on a bi-county basis is difficult. Would you like to add anything to that?
Thank you, Leanne. Excuse me. So good evening, Chairman and members of the board. I'm just going to provide a couple of specifics, examples to illustrate some of the points that Leanne just went over for behavioral health. And as you may know, Mental Health Services Act, also known as MHSA, it comes in 3 major funding buckets: community services and supports, prevention and early intervention, and innovation. And so currently, Sutter Yuba Behavioral Health, we provide around 185 folks an intensive outpatient program called Full Service Partnerships through Community Services and Supports funding. If the governor's proposal to redirect MHSA funds were to be approved, 30% of the currently spending community services and supports funding the treatment of those individuals will be redirected to housing, and this will leave those treatment costs unfunded. Additionally, Sutter Yuba Behavioral Health, along with our public health department, provides prevention and early intervention funding and serving about 1,665 community members with various activities to include youth in schools with suicide prevention education, groups, grief and wellness supports, training like mental health first aid, which is free to the community, suicide prevention training called ASSIST. And again, if the governor's proposal were approved, it could eliminate all of this funding. And so all of those activities could potentially be unfunded, leaving those 665 folks in our community without that education and support provided by the county. And lastly, innovation funding would likely be, under the governor's proposal, eliminated altogether. And so programs like our iCare mobile engagement team, which has actually seen about 330 folks in person who are the declining services population, or folks who might need additional increased supports, intensive supports to access behavioral health services, would be unfunded. And so that program would no longer be able to continue. So, all of this to say that the governor's proposal for an MHSA redirection to housing, which is important, but it has some real impacts for us should it be approved by the voters. So, of course, I do need to note that Sutter Yuba Behavioral Health will absolutely work to support our clients' safety and, of course, their services to the best of our ability. But these types of redirections will have a significant impact on us. As you also may know, so Leanne mentioned the Eggman bill, so conservatorships, and this is where this fits in. The county is responsible to be the public guardian for individuals who require conservatorships, and there are two types of conservatorships. One called a probate conservatorship for folks who have complex medical needs, and one called an LPS conservatorship for folks who have intensive behavioral health needs. And over the past several years, and since 2019, there's been a 61% increase in LPS conservatorships, growing from 55 cases in 2019 to 89 and growing in current year in 2023. And so a majority of services provided to conservatees includes, of course, the behavioral health treatment services, but the cost for paying for their living expenses, sometimes each month at 100% if they do not have other coverage and benefits. And that is paid by our local behavioral health realignment funding. And so a majority, in fact, of our local behavioral health realignment funding goes to support our LPS conservatees. And so if this rate continues to grow of conservatee cases, there may be a point that behavioral health, all of our behavioral health realignment, would need to be supporting only conservatees. And that would really leave many of our other behavioral health services unable to be provided due to that lack of local realignment funding. And then lastly, I'd like to highlight the Department of State Hospitals, which Leanne mentioned, and essentially the realignment of the state's responsibilities without adequate funding to counties for without any funding. Yes, thank you, Leanne. For those folks who've had a felony incident and require competency restoration to participate in legal proceedings. And so the state currently has a very high waiting list. They are at risk for receiving a significant fine for having this waiting list. And so to alleviate this risk at the state level, the Department of State Hospitals has begun through programming to attempt to influence the use of local county funds, such as realignment and potentially general fund, by unfairly shifting their obligations to counties for these cases. And so this issue impacts not only behavioral health, but our colleagues in the Sheriff's Department, the District Attorney's Office, the courts, and the public defenders, because these processes stretch across all operations in these departments and operations. So while these are significant issues, and I anticipate we'll continue to be talking about them, we just wanted to give you a good snapshot of some of the things that are to come with some of the policy changes being suggested at this moment in time. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So finally, and I'm just going to go over the last few slides pretty quickly, the state encroachment on local services, I think I've beaten to death at this point. But the one thing I wanted to mention is we have certain legal requirements for behavioral health services. And so if realignment is being eaten at by commitments, that's going to cause pressure on the general fund. And the penalty is that we'll end up in lawsuits and we'll lose. And so, and of course we would share that cost with Yuba County because we provide services for two counties. But nevertheless, it's a cost that we don't currently have. Once again, the state, we know that they're going to do this and it's going to continue to happen. And so I think that there is little ability to influence, but where we can, we need to be putting significant pressure. And do it through like RCRC and our constituency groups. And I think for us, RCRC is one of the most powerful associations that we have because we bind together as the small counties so that we can't be overrun by the large urban counties. So we would never come to you without some solutions to close the budget gap. And one of the ones that really rises to the top based on the things that we've discussed, and you see that rising cost in public safety, is right now the Walton annexation area, I think that's called Beat 7, is subject to the tax share agreement from 22 years ago to be exact. And the cost of providing those services in Beat 7 is about $1 million a year. Last year, which we got paid in this year, we get paid in arrears, the amount that we got in the tax share agreement was $554,000. So this county is subsidizing those costs provided to citizens of the city of Yuba City. And that's one thing I think we really need to look at about, do we need to reduce services in that area, or do we need to work with the city in order to be compensated for the cost of providing those? That was supposed to be phased out years ago. It was intended to be phased out when build out happened in that area. It's just never happened in that area, despite build out going on across all of Yuba City. Once again, we are bearing the lion's share of the cost of homeless services. That's something that we should be able to negotiate with the other jurisdictions and have them provide a share of the cost of housing, of the cost of the overnight camping facility. And all of these things are, subject to negotiation. At some point, we may have to provide, or we may have to ask for a soft hiring freeze. This really isn't that difficult for us to implement because it takes us so darn long. So, for example, we'll probably go in and make a recommendation to pare the sheriff's budget down through a salary savings line. He'll still be able to live within his budgets because it will reflect his actual vacancy rate. And then, we have some backstops there. But it's so difficult for him to hire to begin with that he probably wouldn't even feel that. But if we're going to do it, we need to do it across all general funded departments with a few exceptions. For example, probation, because they have so many positions they're holding vacant, we may have to say, we won't impose that freeze on them. We may reduce vehicle replacements. Even though some of those vehicles are old and have high mileage, their maintenance costs are relatively low. So we may defer those for a year, but that's really kicking the can down the road. It'll provide some temporary relief, but it's not going to be a real solution. And then we could eliminate most capital projects that are within the general fund. Again, we're still going to have capital needs, but we may have to look at, is there something else we can do? And then at some point, we may have to reduce services in selected departments that receive general fund support. And so, that's never easy. And we would like to try all of these other things to balance the budget first. So with that, I'll just say the budget book will be published and released to the public on June 8th. The CAO will present the recommended budget on June 13th. Budget hearings will commence on June 20th. The tentative recommended budget will be brought to you for approval on June 27th. We have to do that by law in order to continue to operate after July 1. And then budget adoption is expected sometime in September of 2023. And with that, I am happy to answer any questions.
I'll bring it back to the board for questions. You want to start at that end of the table?
Go ahead.
Okay, first of all, Leanne, I'd like to thank you. This was excellent, and I love the history part because I think most of the public doesn't have any idea of how we got where we're at. And as a matter of fact, some of the stuff I didn't even know. But I'd just like to add a couple of comments on certain things that the state has left us with, some presents. The Williamson Act funding was supposed to be funded by the state every year, and I believe it's costing us about $250,000 a year this year, and it's called subvention funds, and the idea is to preserve and protect open space and habitat for endangered species and stuff, and habitat for everything, and that's what the Williamson Act was set up. And every major agricultural county except for Yuba County has Williamson Act, and we have it in Sutter County, but the state quit funding the subvention funds. They haven't paid them for over 10 years. So we're probably in the hole, I don't know.
The state did say that you can terminate your contracts or you can raise the money locally. So they did give you a back.
Right. So we actually switched to a 9-year program which saved part of the money, but it's still not whole.
Nope.
And then I just thought one other interesting, Lisa Herbert not only does weights and measures, but parts of weights and measures, make sure you get an even gallon of gas. And you actually have your little gas rig, you got a new one a couple years ago, right? And it measures and makes sure the pumps are reading accurately. And then the state is going to close 3 more prisons, I understand, this year. And I'm sure we'll get those share of prisoners in our jail. which will add to the cost of jail operations more. Those are a few things I just thought the public would find interesting. Thank you.
Supervisor McKelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I got a few things here. And I know we've talked about some of this. And first thing I've got on here, and Jennifer, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I know that obviously you need an increase in funding. I wonder, do we know what that request is, or is it possible to do that?
So, like most department heads, Jennifer listened to our budget instruction, and she came in with a budget that does have a net county cost increase, but it's relatively modest. So I don't think that her request, and I'm sorry, I should have said the district attorney, not
Yes,
Jen.
the district attorney.
But she came in with a request that doesn't fully provide her all the resources that she needs, like all departments. And so nobody is funded to the level that they really need to be funded because there just isn't enough money for that.
Yeah, I know. It's just unfortunate because obviously there's a clear need there. So that was just one thing.
To the chair. Sorry, I just wanted to add to that. We are working with the district attorney and HR to come up with solutions for the deputy DA position. So we're hoping to have something relatively soon.
Okay, good. And then my next question is either for you or maybe for council, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but maybe you could just research this for us, is if we keep spending money out of our general fund on the CSA for fire, do we end up after so much time setting a precedent that we have to continue to fund it?
I don't know that I'd have an offhand answer, but
no, I know. That's why I want you to just look into it, maybe.
Yeah. I may be able to answer a little bit of that.
Okay.
So every time we've come to the board with a recommendation to provide funding to County Service Area F, it's either been for a specific piece of equipment, or like PPE, or a fire engine, or it has said a one-time. We've always been extremely clear that this is a one-time for fear that we would set a precedent there. So I think that that would be what we would fall back on in this particular case.
Okay. Next thing. This is for you or Sarah. The conservatorships, I know that they've put some higher standards on that, right? So that it's not as easy to just put some, because it's so difficult to get them out of it, right? If they're entered into a conservatorship. Do you think that's going to save money by maybe giving time to keep people out of it?
I think probably not, because I'm sure there was some considerable review of conservatorship processes in California due to Britney Spears in that case.
Right, right.
But I don't know that the findings for the clients that we serve will change. And so what we've typically found is that the conservatorships are increasing and people are continuing to meet requirements legally for those conservatorships, which, as you said, are a very high burden.
Right. It was tough to get her out of it, but we can't put Kanye West in a conservatorship. Thank you. All right. Thank you. That's all I had.
Certainly not in this county.
Okay.
Supervisor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Leanne, for your presentation. Really appreciate it. I too appreciate the history going back, and then a reminder that really we are an arm of the state, and so much limitation in the decisions we have. But that's why we have to speak louder and keep going forward to protect our county and our constituents. I just have some questions on the proposed budget solutions. As it says to close the $3.2 million gap, and then I'm trying to do the math and just figure out where it comes from. But when you say reduce the services in Walton annexation area, can you explain a little bit about what we would have to do? Because when you're saying reduce, you don't mean eliminate, right? You're saying reduce the service.
I would say that's really a question for the sheriff, and he and I have discussed this briefly yesterday, and because I didn't want to blindside him with that. But he really hasn't contemplated what that would look like.
Okay.
I think that the better point would be really is not reduce the services, but have Yuba City step in and do their fair share of the services there, and let us do what was originally intended 22 years ago,
Okay,
which is to step away from doing that.
I guess my question is, like, would that reduction equal the 554,000? The reduction in services you're speaking about right now would, or considering or proposing or potentially,
Sure.
consulting with the sheriff and knowing that the city, that reduction would equal 554,000.
So it would not.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the master tax exchange agreement would still provide us in funding. We haven't really looked into that very deeply yet, because we still would get some of that tax exchange money. But if you do the simple math and say it costs us $1 million, we have a $450,000 hole. So that the simple math would say it would cost us $450,000 left.
450, okay.
But I mean, I'm not going to hang my reputation on that.
No,
That's
no,
off the top of
I'm
my
just
head.
kind of going approximately because I look over your proposed budget solutions, and I mean, though painful, these are less painful than some of the things that are potentially getting mentioned as well. So if there was a way to close the budget gap utilizing your recommendations or a good portion of them, I think this is a good opportunity for us to consider those, or not tonight, but overall. So.
Well, one of the things that I didn't mention there, because it's pretty limited in our ability to do it, but the museum and the library have been very successful using their development officer
Yes.
to reduce the general fund impact, so that they're working very hard to do that, and they did come in with budget requests that were very similar to last year's net county cost. And the difference, for example, in the museum is Edel Hall. We have to replace the flooring in there because that's a detractor from people wanting to rent Edel Hall.
Right.
So will have a revenue offset, but they're very thoughtful in that, and I think all departments can do that. But in just a regular general thing that we do, what happens is that funders from outside want you to do something new. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to offset a current net county cost. So we have to be really thoughtful about that. But I think that the library and the museum are an excellent example of something that is out of the box thinking.
That's great, and I agree with you. I think the library and the museum have done a tremendous job recently, especially in bringing in other revenue sources, and then also speaking to all the department heads. Most of the department heads I've had conversations with, they've been working really hard on budget overall. So that part, without question, that's why some of these recommendations I appreciate, because it's, like I said, it's less hurtful to the departments. Hurtful, I don't know is a word, but there'll be less of an impact for it.
Well, and by extension to your constituents. Because people receive these services. We are a service organization.
Yeah, we can limit less services that way. So the next item you had was offset the county homeless services with a substantial contribution from cities to reduce overall service levels to legal requirement. Can you elaborate on this a little bit more?
So under our settlement, based on the requirements that we have to provide beds, that we can't disrupt people from camping unless we have beds to put them in. We do have some legal requirements to maintain beds or places to rest, under that. So we still will have to have a better way. We still will have to have the overnight camping. But the cities are part of this. The people who are homeless are generally living within the cities because there's more access to services there. And so it is a city-county problem across the state. This isn't trying to pick on Live Oak or Yuba City. It's a problem across the state. And solving homelessness is one of the most difficult things to do. And I can't say that there's a jurisdiction who's really been able to solve the problem. A lot of them have moved it out. But so asking everybody to be a financial participant, not just come to a meeting, not just say, well, our officers are doing this or this person's doing that, but really be a true partner in the cost of providing the services is what I'm suggesting.
Understood. Okay. And then with that said, if this board decided, you mentioned a number of increase from like 760 some thousand to 1.1 million, I believe. If this board decided to limit that number to a set number, let's say 500,000, is that something that is allowable, legal, possible? I don't know what our limitations are on that.
I don't know.
That's a random number I just threw out there.
Yeah, and I think that we need to, we would really have to crunch those numbers with the department. The first thing we would do is try to use grant funding to have robust services. And that $1.12 million, that may not materialize as that, because the department's really good about trying to pull in those dollars and capture them and reduce that cost. But unfortunately, we can't count on that. We don't want to put funds in there that we're not positive are going to materialize. So what we would do is if the board said, no, we're only going to pay this much in general fund for homeless services, then what we would try to do first is find additional funding. And then secondly, we would look at the services, see what are the most effective, and see what we have to legally do. And of course, we would have to work with county council because of the legal requirements in the settlement. So I think it will take a lot of minds to do that.
Okay, and then with that, a follow-up question to that is, so is there a method in place to bill the cities for services that their residents utilize for homeless, I guess you can't say residents and homeless, but homelessness services that are provided?
If we did it now, we have to do it quite manually.
Okay.
Under Workday, we'll be able to just send them a direct bill.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, we can do it. We'd have to have some sort of agreement that would allow them to pay us. They're under the same constraint that we are, that you can't just pay for anything anytime. You have to have a legal authority to pay it. So my suggestion would be that we really work actively with the city to delineate who pays for what.
Yeah, I think especially now we have a very good working relationship, and I think they're open to that discussion from our discussions that we've had one as well. So
to the chair, follow-up just quickly. The city has offered to pay for half, and going back to for half of the overnight camping area. No, that's not everything, but it is a start, and we've been jointly working on that. Yes.
That's great. That's great to hear. Thank you, Steve. So I just have a couple more follow-up, and I know Supervisor Ziegemeier's itching here, so. But I was really intrigued by the budget solutions that you provided, and I just wanted to make sure I was really clear on those as we're going forward. So the next item you had was soft hiring freeze with 2 pay periods across general fund or departments. So when you say soft hiring freeze, do you mean, can you go ahead and elaborate on that? Mm-hmm. You mentioned a little bit about it, but.
So a hard hiring freeze is the position becomes vacant and we don't allow you to fill it. And we've had in the past a procedure where any position that was requested to be filled had to go through the CAO's office. For administrative efficiency, and because we had, sufficient turnover that it wasn't putting the budget pressure, we actually have lifted that requirement. So what we would do is we would put that back in place. We would hold the position vacant for 2 additional pay periods, and then we would allow it to be filled. But you can never be absolute in that, because there are positions that are so crucial to fill. For example, if we had the ability to bring on a code enforcement person, we'd probably grab them right now. It's the really difficult positions, and it's the technical positions, engineers, nurses, nurse practitioners, accountants, all of the ones that require not only a degree, but they require experience in the fields, in public service, and those are difficult. And so generally, if we can get them, deputies even sometimes, if we can get them, we're going to grab them. And so we don't want to inhibit the operation of the county too much. But so there, I think, has to be some thought into it. It can't just be a closed door. And that's where we really respect the departments and their own opinions. If Jen comes to me and if the district attorney comes to me and says, hey, I got one, and it's a felony district attorney, we're not going to say, yeah, no. we would say go forth and hire.
Yes.
So, I mean, there is a massaging to it, and that's why we call it a soft freeze as opposed to a hard freeze.
Understood. All right, great. Thank you for the explanation. And then is there anything that you could do, like, I'd like to see this formulated to see how close we could close the budget gap with this, because it says could get close to the 3.2 million, but I'm envisioning a spreadsheet with these items and kind of tweaking the numbers and seeing what it looks like. I'm just, because this way, if we could consider this further, I think this is a really good solution that you presented overall.
So what we do when we bring you back the recommended budget, we do tell you where we made those recommendations, and that's at the board's discretion to say yes or no on those. And so you will see it again in June, yes, with the recommended actions and how much it let us close. The other thing is, in the budget, we can only make forecasts on the revenue based on what we know now. So when we meet next month with HDL, Hinterleiter, Delamis, they may tell us, oh, sales tax is looking way better, or Prop 172 tax is looking way better, or oh, it's looking way worse. And we'll have to make some tweaks there. And sometimes we're able to find general revenues that are actually a little bit higher or lower, but generally they're a little bit higher than what our current year projections are. And one of the places that we may see that is in the tobacco settlement. We have that budgeted at $900,000. The last couple of years, it's come in above $1 million. So that would close, potentially $200,000 of that gap right there. So we reassess that continually until we produce the budget book.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Leanne. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Supervisor Ziegelmeier?
I feel like we're in a lot of one-sided relationships here at the county. And what keeps me up at night are these one-sided relationships. Homeless, Live Oak, Walton area, library, museum, fire. I've heard that over 90% of the homeless are from the city, but yet we pay 1.1. So if we paid our fair share, we'd save $1 million there. 450,000 on the Walton area. We got to work on this contract with Live Oak and Sheriff. That's well over $500,000 there. Museum. What was our budget in museum last year? And library as well?
The museum was a net county cost of $388,000, and this year it's $397,000, or a 2.2%.
And the library?
The library is, sorry, the writing's really small in here. The library was $1.554 million last year. It's $1.563 this year. That's a $9,960 increase in net county cost, or 0.6%. They came in at their net county cost for last year.
I'm going to guess that over 50% of the city uses the library, and less than 50% of the county. So what I'm getting at is partnerships, relationships, and building on those relationships. And that's one key part into balancing the budget. Another thing is impact fees and figuring out how we could, I brought it up at the supervisor meeting a few days ago. We talked about grants towards a treatment plant. I'd gladly vote to spend $2 million towards a grant towards a treatment plant to get some sort of commercial industrial on Highway 20 in Sutter County, not in Yuba City, but in Sutter County. Something that's going to build up taxes and get us more revenue. Sutter Point. I feel like, I'm happy with the way things are going right now, and hopefully things are going to move a little faster. Hopefully with the school, they get it figured out. We can get some growth there with the piping and so forth. That was liked what we heard this week. And once again, that's just more revenue coming in, more growth. Going back to the impact fees, I spoke about that. Some sort of impact fee forgiveness and growth. If you're going to bring in 30, 40 jobs in, let's say somewhere between $2 and $3 million in sales a year, it behoove us to forgive some sort of $30,000, $40,000 impact fee to get those structures brought over here a bill. But like I said, a budget is, there's a lot of moving parts in these budgets. But for me personally, I look at these relationships and how much they affect the budget. It's huge. It's huge. And I work for Sutter County, just like you all. So I totally respect the city of Live Oak and I respect our city council members. But at the end of the day, I work for the county. I have to do what's right for the county and fight on behalf of the county. And hopefully we negotiate better deals where we feel like we're all paying our fair share, which will hopefully in the next year or so, when this comes back, we see it's a little different and we're able to fill up some of those slots. I know, like we said earlier, how we're going to lose a few key department heads, and not just department heads. We're losing great people. Losing, yes, to other counties and other jobs. And I had an individual approach me this week and said, well, they're in there for the retirement. I said, are you going to work for that pay for 30 years for that retirement? You're not. You're not going to go work for $19, $21, $22 for 30 years for the retirement. I said, I wish, but you got to be able to make a living for yourself. You got to be able to provide for your family. You got to be able to make, the college fund for your kids and so forth. And in order for us to get somewhere, we feel comfortable with a balanced budget. Like I said, it goes back to the contracts and the agreements we have with Live Oak, the city, and what we're doing with homeless and some of the other departments we share in the city, like museum and library. So that's my biggest deal is relationships. I know that Chair Baines and Vice Chair Conant have those bi-monthly or monthly meetings along with CEO Smith, and hopefully we could really push those partnerships. Well, no, I'm talking, no, that is the ad hoc committee. I'm talking about the vice chair and chair meet with the vice mayor and mayor every month. So, but there's also an ad hoc committee. But so, like I said, that's what I had to say. Relationships are key. I think you did an amazing job, Leanne. I want to thank you and staff. There's not a person in here, Liz, and those watching on TV, that if we ask any one of these department heads a question, they're right there. And they will answer us, and if they don't have the answer, they'll get it, and I really appreciate that. It is so beneficial. I thank you for everything you do, especially with what you have to work with. And it's a big county, all right? So right now, I'm going to say this right now, I believe there might be 3 sheriff deputies out, if we're lucky, or 4, between Sacramento, Colusa, and Live Oak. It's a lot of area to cover. If someone pulls someone over off Riego Road and they got to go back up because the license plates reads, there's no one over here. And in order to get to where we need to fully fund these departments, same thing with probation, same thing with fire, having to extract guys out, we need more revenue. And like I said, I believe it starts out with relationships. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Through the chair, I know you have some comments. Could I make one quick comment? Again, Supervisor Ziegemeier just reminded me of something, in that we have these intergovernmental meetings with the city of Yuba City. I've also reached out to a couple of the council members of Live Oak, and we're going to begin to do the same thing. Not only because we have contract negotiations, and that obviously Steve handles, and Aaron Palmer, but I think it's good for all of us to be informed about those negotiations. And so we wanted to create that. And then also, I'll clearly be fighting for Live Oak to get a slice of, if there's a new tax measure, a little bit. I know it's a smaller city, very small compared to Yuba City, but I will definitely be fighting for them to get a little slice of the pie there. So just wanted you guys to be informed of that, and that will probably be Chairman Baines and I on that committee. So just wanted to let you know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You know, I just want to thank you, Leanne. I want to thank you for a great presentation. I want to thank all the staff, everybody that's put time into putting this presentation together. Steve, the entire administrative team, right? You and your team for getting us thus far. And I want to thank every department head, one for understanding our position with the general fund, and more importantly, with your anticipated cooperation in balancing the budget. So I want to thank everybody for I guess their understandings, and I think the most important thing is to remember that we're all in this together, and that we'll make it through it together, right? Now it's time to kind of tighten up our belts and see what we could do, but we will make it through it. And
Chairman Baines, if I may add just a couple of extra things. First of all, I really have to say thank you. You know, it took a lot of people to get us to a meeting tonight. And I especially wanted to thank the information technology and clerk of the board staff, who have all worked an extraordinarily long day today. Also, our department heads and their fiscal staff, who, they do a huge amount of work in a very short period of time. And the department heads are so great to work with us. And then within our office, Annie Liu, Laura Granados, Jamie Yang, Lisa Bush. This is a huge lift for them, and they have to get us all to where I keep saying, can we roll up? Can we roll up? Can we roll up? Which means, can we roll up the budget and see what the deficit is? They do such a great job. And then also and of course, Steve Smith, who, really gives us the latitude to do this really well by giving us very high level instruction. But also the board, clearly, this is an extremely difficult job that you have. And so it's very important that people recognize that you guys are, the job that you do is hard. This is not easy. And so providing good direction to us is also very important. So thank you.
thank you. If there's no further business, the meeting adjourned.
Yuba-Sutter.live's local government live streams are presented by Plumas Lake Self Storage in Plumas Lake, where lifelong local residents are helping other residents keep things safe, providing indoor storage units, outdoor RV and vehicle parking, moving supplies, and Penske truck rentals. Details at PlumasLakeSelfStorage.com.